Today is Monday, May 4th, 2026. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. The latest on the Strait of Hormuz. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. You can always email us as well. We enjoy hearing from you. quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. That's our email address. Glad you're here with us, getting through the news of the day. We're here each and every weekday, bright and early. With me today, CBN's Billy Hallowell. Billy, on the focus story, a Christian leader is on a mission to stop sex trafficking and has embarked on a pretty remarkable journey.
Yeah, this one is powerful. We'll get into the details, but it's a pretty cool example of Christians taking something evil and really turning it into something good.
Yeah, looking forward to the details there. Coming up on the main thing as well, China's crackdown on Catholics is intensifying as the CCP pushes believers toward a church it can control. All of that's coming up on the podcast and more. First, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Christian Solidarity International. And as you just heard, China is doing things like that, cracking down on Catholics. We know that China, one of the tactics they use is trying to pressure the church and change into a thing that they can control, that the communist government control, because they view faith as a direct threat to the communist government and the goals and the control that they want over their people. So that is just the latest form of Christian persecution that we're seeing in China. And one of the groups that is battling and helping this sort of persecution is Christian Solidarity International, and they are the sponsor of today's Quick Start podcast, and they are the ones who are on the ground helping people like those in China who are dealing with these sorts of persecutions. In China, you have the government cracking down on home churches, and they have these home churches precisely because the government wants to regulate all the churches, and if you don't, then they just start pressuring you and pushing you, and they destroy buildings, and they invade your home and things like that to really intimidate and threaten Christians across the country. Well, Christian Solidarity International is the type of group that is meeting these people on the ground, meeting their immediate needs. They are walking alongside the pastors who are shepherding flocks in these highly persecuted areas. If you want to partner with them and help those persecuted Christians in need, go to csi-usa.org/quickstart. That's all you have to do. csi-usa.org/quickstart, and you can help persecuted Christians and be the hands and feet of Jesus in places that you'd never be able to step foot on in most circumstances. You'd never be able to physically go there, but that's what CSI does, and you can walk alongside and help them do that as well. csi-usa.org/quickstart. And we're going to go to the news in 90 seconds now, and the U.S. is launching a major operation to guide stranded commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz, a critical global oil choke point. Iran is firing back with a stark warning, saying any foreign military presence in the strait will be attacked, raising fears of direct confrontation. Roughly 20% of the world's oil flows through this narrow passage, so any disruption is already hitting markets and fueling uncertainty. We've got national gas prices, according to AAA, of gas across the country at $4.50 a gallon. So this is clearly having a damaging effect on oil and gas prices around the world. And a new study finds 74% of Gen Z says you can live a fulfilling life without children, and fewer see marriage as essential for a stable home. Many still want marriage, but they're delaying it, citing financial pressure, anxiety, and emotional complexity shaping major life decisions. Spiritually, the numbers are more concerning. Just 1% of Gen Z holds a biblical worldview, the lowest of any generation. There's also drift on core beliefs, with rising numbers questioning biblical truth, morality, and even foundational teachings about Christ. So those are just some of today's top headlines. You can check out more stories over at cbnnews.com. And we've been diving into these numbers. We've seen both sides of this, Billy, on kind of the biblical worldview. There are some encouraging numbers on the one hand, but then you see concerning numbers like this as well. But I thought it was interesting that younger people, and Gen Z in particular here in this case, their views on marriage and there's a whole lot of things that I think are playing into this sort of phenomena. I saw a clip of, I don't know who the guy was, but it was just one of these panel shows. And he was talking about how younger people don't want to get married because it's from social media. Before that, they're having trouble even, dancing or approaching women, all these normal social interactions from the past. They're afraid of it because they are afraid of getting recorded. Like if you go out and dance at a party or a club or something like that, which was something that, people would do and just have fun, but they feel they're going to, I might get recorded. Everyone's got their phones out. And so I don't want to embarrass myself and things like that. So all of these normal social interactions that we kind of think are maybe innocuous or just silly, when you pile them on top of each other, is it leading to things like less marriage? And then they don't even want to bother with it. And, the courting and all of that. And it's very concerning, Billy, because we know in scripture that, right from Genesis 2, while we know some people can be gifted with the spiritual gift of singleness, generally that's not going to be the case. In Genesis 2, it says it's not good that the man should be alone, as we see the creation of woman in the garden. And, marriage obviously points itself to Christ and his relationship with the church. So we know the symbolism there, and we know the benefits of the nuclear family. You've talked about that a million times on this podcast. So very interesting. And I would say numbers we need to be praying about.
Yeah. And I think too, the moral implications, when I do talk to people who are younger, trying to figure this stuff out, they really struggle to find people even. Right. Yeah. So it's like, it's a totally different world when people's morals and values, we've talked a lot about quote unquote revival, that is happening within some circles, but there's also still a lot of moral chaos. So it's not shocking that people are struggling or even discouraged too, on top of all the other factors, the social media, the disconnection and all of that. So it's something we do need to be praying about, because a culture and a society is built on those structures. So it's sad to watch them sort of crumble away.
Yeah, it is. And I would also say too, that for people that are struggling with fear and anxiety over, I'm not ready yet to get married. God is going to provide. And so if you find someone who wants to be your spouse, and you don't need to have a fancy wedding, you don't need to have a fancy ring. These are things that are just earthly things. The marriage and the relationship is what's important. So I obviously everybody has their own situations, but I would say in general, like that, those reasons are not reasons you want to put off something that is a good thing and put it off for years and years and years, when, for earthly reasons, like how much money you have or what job you have or things of that nature. So obviously there's a lot to talk about there, and we could probably dive into that for, a whole episode and a whole other podcast. And maybe we will talk about that at some point, because it is important, as we've talked about on this podcast. Billy, you've talked about it a lot, the critical nature of the husband and the wife and the family unit, and what that means for not only those individuals, but for society at large. It's very clear that God's design is what leads to a flourishing nation and a flourishing world. So definitely numbers and a cultural phenomenon happening that we need to be praying about for sure. All right, we are going to go to the focus story now. And as Billy mentioned there at the top, a Christian leader's on a mission to stop sex trafficking and has embarked on a fascinating kind of angle to this and redeeming a former strip club. So what happened here? What's going on?
Yeah, this is a really interesting story. Anti-trafficking leader Caleb Altmaier, he's the founder of Helping Captives, recently told me about how he and his team made this decision to purchase a former strip club and to transform it into a center that is aimed at rescuing and restoring victims of human trafficking. And so it's really an interesting story. But basically their goal was to take this place where all of these immoral and terrible things are going on, and to really retrofit it and turn it into a place that rescues women and changes lives. And so they are in the middle of being on that pretty incredible journey. And it's sort of one of those ones that turns your head, because you're like, wait a minute, you're doing what? You imagine this strip club everybody knew in the community for what it was. Suddenly that's shifting and changing, and you've got this anti-trafficking group at the center of that.
So what's Caleb's journey towards getting this to happen? What's that been like?
Yeah, so, he talked about how his organization helping captives, they quickly sort of realized when they were doing work to help women. He was like, we thought we were going to help 3 to 5 women, and they had 21 women go through their program, their house, in 9 months. And he realized, this is before this strip club project, he realized that this was a major problem. They were doing a lot of different ministry activities, and when they realized the depths of the problem of trafficking, they were like, okay, we need to actually stop everything else we're doing and focus in on that. And so their smaller outreach became their central focus of just trying to fight trafficking. And so they sort of dove in on this vision. And when they saw that the strip club was closing down, they were praying about this freedom center they wanted to create. And again, this is a place where women could receive immediate care, detox, counseling, long-term support. When that strip club shut down, God sort of stepped in, and he felt prompted Caleb to go and try to take this place over so that they could create this center. And he basically said, he was like, look, I know, you know what, God, maybe you're crazy enough that you would take a strip club that was known for objectifying women and turn it into a center that would be known nationally for helping women come out of trafficking. Like, the irony of that was not lost on him, but he started taking steps into sort of trying to secure the building. And at one point, the ministry was offered this opportunity to potentially get a $1 million grant, because getting this property and then, renovating it was going to be very expensive. But the problem was that the funding, if they secured it, it would have required the facility to be for secular use only. So they would not have been able to be a faith-based organization, essentially. And he said that condition really forced him and his team to totally rethink accepting that money. So they had to not accept the $1 million that they weren't yet offered it, but they could have gone after it, and they probably would have gotten it. So he's like, look, we love Jesus, so we can't do it. He said, or I could take Jesus out of the ministry, which we're not okay with doing, because that was the one thing that truly heals people coming out of this horrendous situation. So they had to come up with the money and figure out how to do this without that grant, which they were able to do. They just paid the building off recently. And now that they own it, they're renovating it. They still need $1.6 million to remodel and prepare. But they're on that journey. They're asking people to support them. And so, yeah, it's just a pretty crazy journey, but God's opened all the doors, and this former strip club is going to become this freedom center.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons to learn here, Billy. What is the biggest thing that you're sort of taking away from this?
Obviously this is a major issue. Caleb said this is the fastest growing criminal industry in the world. It's past drug sales. It's happening everywhere, and it's happening in a city near you, he said. But despite that darkness, they're seeing lives transformed, and even some of the women that have come out of trafficking, they're now working for the organization, and they're free now. And so it's really just a powerful reminder that even in unlikely places, transformation can happen, right? That breakthrough is always possible in the darkness.
Yeah, and that is an interesting statistic about how it's the leading, I forget exactly how you worded it, but obviously one of the biggest problems happening right now as far as criminal activity, about even immoral activity going on, as far as drug use or sexual sin. And it is a phenomenon that's happening right now. Again, we've been talking about Gen Z not wanting to tie the knot, and so much of that to do with social media pressures that happen on people and anxieties that causes. And it also causes people to think they have an opportunity. I see so many times, Billy, people saying, you see it in the news. There'll be somebody who's created an OnlyFans account or something like that. Well, why'd you do it? Well, it helped me pay for college. They use the money as a justification. And so the reality is, like any of these things, you create an OnlyFans platform and there's a gazillion people on there. Most of the people are not going to be successful with this, right? But still, millions of people are in there trying it. It's just like creating a YouTube channel. Yeah, you can make millions of dollars on YouTube, but the reality is very few people actually do that. And there are zillions of channels. So the point here is that you have millions of people diving themselves into sexual sin with a justification of, well, it's going to pay for my education or something like that. But man, that just leads to a culture that is really going into some really broken areas here. And I think it's probably one of the reasons it's contributing to what Caleb's seeing here with all these people being led into trafficking.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's all a very slippery slope too. And I think that as a society and a culture, we need to be pushing back. So I love what he's doing on this, and got to be praying to get that other $1.6 million in the door.
Yeah, absolutely important stuff. And definitely praying that this ministry continues to grow, because obviously it is very needed with the saturation of sexualized content that's leading people into these lives of sexual sin. And it's very, very dangerous. It's very, very sad that people are falling into this, but glad that people like Caleb and his team are out there fighting it. So appreciate you bringing that to the podcast today. And we're going to go to the main thing now. And Andrew Harding of the Heritage Foundation joined Madison Seals to explain China's long history of religious control, why Catholic communities are facing renewed pressure, and what can be done to protect believers under the CCP. That's today's main thing.
Andrew, since you're a policy analyst in Heritage's Asian Studies Center, I'd like to get your take on this crackdown on Catholics in China. How is this similar or different to the Chinese government's treatment of other religious groups?
Well, thanks for having me. I think this is unfortunately similar to what China has historically done under the Chinese Communist Party's rule. And a particular example I think about is going many decades back to Tibet, in which in the 1950s, the Chinese Communist Party had an entire effort engaged in different military activity as well, but it forced the People's Liberation Army, forced the Tibetan Buddhist government out of China. It forced them to now, you see the Dalai Lama, for example, he's now primarily based in India, but there was an emphasis toward the CCP did not want to have any type of religious authority within its borders. And that gets to a broader point, is how it connects to now what we're seeing with this crackdown on Catholic practitioners, is that the Chinese Communist Party views itself and preaches itself in a way as the ultimate authority. And so any religion, whether it's Catholicism, whether it's Buddhism, Islam, you name it, making arguments that no, there's a higher authority. And so for the Chinese Communist Party, it is a complete threat to its legitimacy, and they are very focused on cracking down. So now while they're going door to door, putting people under house arrest, there's a long tradition of the Chinese cracking down on religious groups that it views may pose a threat to its legitimacy.
And this crackdown has driven a lot of church groups of different faiths literally underground. Can you talk to that a little bit? What is the underground church and what does that look like?
So an underground church refers to a group, either a group of people gathering or a place where people host gatherings that is not registered under the Chinese Communist Party. And so the CCP technically claims that it allows or authorizes the practice of a handful of religions, but it's not in, say, how we think about it in the United States. It's not freedom of religion. How the CCP operates is that you can practice a religion if it is authorized by the Chinese Communist Party and you continue to pledge your ultimate loyalty and authorities to the Chinese Communist Party. What that looks like then is then different churches or places for people to worship above ground is heavily regulated by the party. And practices and teachings and meetings have to be observed by the party, have to be approved. Any texts that are distributed, the party has full awareness of, and they allow it to happen. It's not something that is done authentically or out of genuine faith here. Compared to, say, when we're looking at underground churches, these are people that really want to avoid and don't believe in the ultimate authority of the Chinese Communist Party. They know that the party is trying to enforce a crackdown, enforce a view, and it doesn't allow them to really actually practice as we're taught to do. And one particular example is Pastor Ezra Jin, who just recently, a few months ago, end of 2025, of the Zion Church, was detained in his home along with dozens of other church leaders because he was leading a large underground group of churches that were unregistered with Chinese authorities. So as a result, they were defying government restrictions. And as a result, the party was willing to crack down on this. That's why these underground churches are so important.
Yeah, it's just hard to imagine here in the U.S. with our freedom of speech, our freedom of religion, being forced to basically silence your faith and subscribe to the beliefs of a government that you don't necessarily agree with or want to live under. What exactly does the state want people to believe or want them to think about the CCP?
The state wants people to believe that the Chinese Communist Party is the ultimate authority in their life. And that's why cracking down on religion and freedom of expression is so important to the party, because not only does it pose a threat just to their daily rule, but also it really tries to hit at one of the core foundational pieces of the logic that underlines the party, that there's every single problem goes through the party is able to make all decisions for the people, and that all loyalty ought to go through the party. So that what we're seeing here with the Chinese Communist Party is wanting to crack down on people that disagree with that. That disagree. So regardless whether it's Catholics or other religious groups, these are Chinese people, and Chinese people that don't want to buy into that notion that the Chinese Communist Party is the ultimate authority. They know that's not true, and they're attempting to practice that. But with the CCP at helm, they're going to prevent that as much as they can. And so this largely goes down to the Marxist-Leninist backings and the foundational principles of the Chinese Communist Party, in which any bit of dissent is completely eradicated as much as possible, where people are detained, imprisoned. There's any types of levers of power that the Chinese Communist Party has to crack down on people. They're going to do that. It is fundamentally a threat to their legitimacy, fundamentally risking the most important thing to the party, and that is its legitimacy and people willing to prop it up and support it for the party to operate as it so chooses. So it's really for them, their survival. For the Chinese Communist Party, it's to demand loyalty, and they'll crack down on people that they perceive to be disloyal.
And has the Chinese government responded to any groups like Human Rights Watch calling them out for this persecution?
Well, they claim that everything is false. Of course, they won't allow the organization to come in and do interviews, of course, but the Chinese Communist Party will happily say that everything's being reported as false, that China is very happy to endorse approved religions that allow normal practices. It's very interesting language that they use about this, to where they try to present themselves as being tolerant and allow people to express themselves, but they also make sure to make very clear that, well, there's only approved ways to do that. So it's not actually freedom of expression. It is authorized expressions. It is authorized religions and ways that the Chinese Communist Party will dictate. So I think not only with Human Rights Watch, but any other group that's doing this type of investigative work on how China cracks down on religion, they're going to keep getting answers from the party saying we're doing it just fine. But thankfully, the truth is really out there, and that here in the United States and around the world, we have a full understanding of not only what China doesn't allow people to see, but also acts that we're uncovering, not to mention the ongoing genocide in Xinjiang. Now, the Chinese are trying to force Uyghur Muslims into incorporating Chinese views, the party as the ultimate authority, and eradicate their culture, religion, and history. This is just yet another continuation of practice that the Chinese Communist Party enforces on this.
Besides prayer and calling out the government, is there anything that the U.S. can and should do to protect Catholics and Christians and any faith in China from persecution?
Well, I think one interesting example that we could see coming up is with the Trump-Xi summit just in about 2 weeks from now. This could be an opportunity to see if the United States is willing to raise religious persecution in a meeting, to see if Xi or others might be willing to release, whether it's Pastor Ezra Jin or others, to see if there's a way, if there's an act of goodwill or maybe some type of dialogue as to what a potential release could look like. But it's important to have these types of issues raised in leader-to-leader meetings. The Chinese are placing a great emphasis on hosting President Trump, and this could be a way to see if the relationship has some type of guardrails put in place. One of those guardrails could be on advocating for the release of those that are unjustly persecuted in China because of their religious beliefs. But additionally, I think another thing is policymakers should be thinking about religious persecution in terms of a national security lens. Is, as we discussed, the Chinese are very much focused on cracking down on people. What that looks like is surveillance. That looks like technology, that looks like on following data and be able to track down where people may live, where they may worship, where they may practice and meet with people. There's very much an element here that I think policymakers, when crafting policy for U.S. policy in response to China, I think focusing on religious persecution and linking that to national security, economic practices, I think could go a long way ensuring that we have the right policies in place that can hold China accountable and ultimately deliver results against the party.
All right, appreciate that conversation there. That's going to leave us with time on the podcast today for one last thing.
We've got Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I think it's such a simple verse, but Jesus will give us rest when we're burdened, when we're struggling, when we're overwhelmed. We can always turn to him, and he will give us the peace that we need to journey through.
Yeah, amen. Great verse for all that we talked about today. I think it's perfectly applicable. So we'll leave it there on this edition of the Quick Start Podcast. As always, get on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com. Make it a daily stop in your news browsing journey. News from a Christian perspective, just not getting that anywhere else. Lord willing, that creek don't rise up on us. We'll be back here tomorrow with more. God bless. We'll see you then.